Okay, Sam, so we're just building up to the 80th anniversary of the Belfast Blitz and the Oval getting bombed. Do you want to just give us a bit of context and background to the state of Glentoran in the late 1930s?
Glentoran in the late 1930s were probably coming good again. That decade generally had been a mixed bag as regards sort of results. In the early 30s, we had a team which included Fred Roberts and Johnny Geary and Peter Doherty, and then for a period sort of in the middle of the decade, things hadn't been so great, which had led to the appointment of an Englishman as a manager in 1936, a gentleman by the name of Sam Jennings. And Sam had sort of decided that the talent that he needed could be found further afield, and had started bringing English and Scottish players into the team. And slowly but surely the results were turning around, and pretty much Glentoran were improving, and Belfast as a city after the recession, the Great Recession, and the outdoor relief scheme in the early 30s, which had men of the district forced to go out and work on projects just to bring in money. So it was a dark enough decade, which and the first sort of shoots of recovery were starting to be seen, both here and also in the city. And then lo and behold, 1939, war breaks out, and the whole dynamic changes.
And in the 1930s, you can remember sort of seeing old photos, massive crowds. Was that sort of commonplace in those
Very much so, yeah. But because the support, the actual fan base was almost completely drawn from heavy industry, and as shipbuilding improved once again, as orders started to come in, and there was more work in the yard, then the terraces were filling up again, and so as industry and business picked up, the crowds picked up. Obviously, results were starting to improve somewhat as well, and this was a really vibrant place. It always had been. The Oval had been the hub of everything social East Belfast. Hard as it may be to imagine, this was the place where, if anything was happening, it was going to be happening at the Oval. So a huge buzz, a huge vibrancy, big crowds, characters like Thomas Pearson, the goalkeeper who had come over from England to play and was a firm fans' favourite. So yeah, it was a real yet another halcyon period in the club's history.
And 1939, war breaking out, how did that change the dynamic of East Belfast, and how did that change the Oval and Glentoran Football Club?
Well, once again, we discovered incredible pictures of. So 1939, war breaks out, and in reality, were things much different for the people of Belfast? Probably not. They weren't touched in the way that the mainland had been touched. But they were aware of Dunkirk and things that were happening, certainly the Battle of Britain. But life pretty much carried on normally. Children were put through drills. There were air raid drills, there were air raid wardens. And what we did discover was that obviously the threat of invasion was playing heavily in the minds of everyone, and had Hitler's armies invaded the mainland, it was obvious that the next port of call was going to be Belfast, and Ireland as an island. So we found these incredible photographs of men who had come to the Oval after work, and these guys were working maybe in the offices, working in Gallagher's, working in the shipyard, the aircraft, Sirocco Works, and hundreds of men over the summer of 1940 would come here after work, and the Ulster Athletic Association would actually put them through like calisthenics and PT and hand-to-hand combat. And in reality, what they were saying was, it might come to a stage where you will have to defend your family from German invasion by physically fighting these people. And this track where we're sitting now, you know, just oozes. The photographs of these men, lovely summer night, tank tops, shirts and ties, doing their calisthenics. So this pretty much, once again, the Oval became, you know, if they had to muster large numbers of people, this was the place that they came to.
And we can see that the pillbox in the hill that's a mainstay of
everybody who ever and so many people have looked at that and actually not known what it was. It's pretty much been used for everything, you know, and And remarkably, if you look at East Belfast, and in East Belfast where we are now, there's no high ground. There's absolutely nothing. If you think in towards the Lagan and sort of up towards the Hollywood Arches and the Beersbridge Road, the highest piece of ground actually to be found in the whole of East Belfast can be found in Sydenham Hill. And when the Ministry of Defence and the military were actually sort of doing reconnaissance on the area to see where they could put observation posts, this hill was the primary place. And you can see, if you go up and stand there, before that wall, and that wall didn't exist before the war, it was a smaller version of it, but you could actually see the airfield. You can see the airfield, you can see the aircraft factory, you can see the shipyard, and in 1940, obviously, the shipyard was building destroyers, frigates, cruisers. There were Royal Naval vessels moored actually there as well, and the war effort, Shorts were building Sterling bombers, Short Sunderland flying boats. And so this gave the military the perfect sort of lookout vantage point, and the sky all around up to Napoleon's Nose, the Castlereagh Hills, you know, they could. So this was manned. This initially the Ministry of Defence had come to Glentoran and said we want to build an observation post, and the Glens, seeing an opportunity, said, well, it'll be £1 a month. And I think eventually they agreed it would be £1 a year was the rental fee for them to build this post. So it was built by the Royal Engineers in 1940 and subsequently manned by the men of the Gloucestershire Regiment who were based in Victoria Park. So they would come over pretty much every night, and five of the men would man that every night, watching the skies for and I'm saying the inevitability of German bombing. But in 1939 and 40, the perception was that the Germans couldn't reach Belfast. So there was almost a naivety and it'll never happen to us. But that's pretty much, you know, another one of the only, to my mind, sort of monuments to the Blitz that still exists is on that hill.
And the Luftwaffe did reach Belfast, but what was their sort of mindset, and how did the Oval sort of become a target for bombing?
Well, it's so obvious as to why the Oval becomes a target. The Luftwaffe, let's face it, were always going to bomb Belfast because of the war effort, and the thing which made Glentoran great up until the 1940s also was the thing that created its downfall, and that is its vicinity to the shipyard. And those people who we talked about, the supporters who came from there, if you look at where we are today, we're slap bang in the middle. Even behind us we had the Gallagher cigarette factory, we had the rope work, which is 500 yards up the Connswater River, surrounded by the Sirocco works. So this, in bombing this maybe 2 square mile area, you're severing every artery of Northern Ireland, because everything has to come through here. We've a power station out there as well, with railway lines. So, you know, it's the obvious target, but as I say, the belief was that the German planes actually couldn't reach Belfast. But what was happening was the Luftwaffe were moving further in to northern France to a point where in November 1940, and we discovered these incredible photographs taken by German reconnaissance of Belfast in November 1940, and they had photographed targets that they had highlighted, and all the ones you would, you know, expect for them to bomb. But target A was the Tanksam Lag at Connswater, and the A on the target is slap bang in the middle of the centre circle here, because from whatever number of thousand of feet that they took the reconnaissance photograph, the Oval's not a normal shaped football pitch. Most football pitches have got 4 stands. They assumed that the Oval shape was part of the oil storage facility, the fuel depots which were across the railway line here. So it was designated as the very first target on one of their bombing runs that they were going to execute. And there always was a myth, certainly in my family and in the streets around the ground, that the bombs had been jettisoned, but it was perfectly executed. It just mistook a football ground for an oil storage facility.
On the night of 4th of May, early 5th of May, what happened here into the surrounding area of East Belfast?
Well, the first raid, obviously, the first big raid, there were 4 raids in total, and I think that naivety, I actually can't believe that it exists, because Belfast Lock had been mined by the Germans. They had mined it. There had been earlier instances of bombings in Bangor, for example. So in Easter 1941, the biggest raids took place over the Easter holidays, and as a result of that, a number of children from the area were evacuated out. People started actually to gravitate towards the Castlereagh Hills and sleep in the ditches in the good nights, rather than being caught in the bombings. But that perception turned all of a sudden. There were hundreds upon hundreds of people killed in the first raid, and everybody then expected the Germans to come back, because they waited for the spring moons. Spring moons lit up Belfast, they didn't need, and in reality the government had failed. The government had let the people down, because shelters were badly built, were really, really poorly constructed. A large amount of money had actually been spent in camouflage and storm out, believe it or not, in molasses and cow dung and things like that, to blacken it out, to the detriment of the people who lived in the streets here. The gun emplacements that were around, I think there were 22, 24 guns to protect the whole of the city. There weren't enough firemen, there weren't enough, so everything was completely inadequate. But after the April raids, what must it have felt like to know that they're coming back, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it. So the next big moons, the next sort of spring bombers moons, if you like, were at the start of May, and lo and behold, having decimated the city the first time, they then tried to set the city on fire and just burn it to the ground, with what was known as the fire raid on the 4th and 5th of May.
And the Oval, from being that thriving place in the late 1930s, what awoke the people of East Belfast?
My goodness. Well, the actual raid itself, the raid commenced at around 9:25 p.m. It's a famous Luftwaffe squadron called the Kampf Group 100, which were a Pathfinder squadron. So they lit the way for the rest of the bombers, and they left their base in Vans Macon, which is actually on the Bay of Biscay near Saint-Nazaire. So what they were able to do, instead of flying up, and you would imagine having to cross England and all that would entail, cross Wales to get there, they were able to fly out across the Bay of Biscay, bank right, and travel up the Irish Sea with impunity, because obviously with Eire being neutral, they weren't going to get sort of any sort of flak coming from there. So the Camp Group 100 left at 9:25 p.m. on the 4th, followed by in and around 200 German Henkel and Dornier bombers. And inside those bombers were 96,000, it's an incredible number, of incendiaries and 200 tons of ordnance that they were just going to disgorge on Belfast. So it took them to in and around after midnight to arrive over Belfast. By this stage, the guys here are manning their positions, whatever. This place is cathedral still, there's nothing happening here. Beautiful moonlit night. There were no fires lit here, so there was no smoke screen put up. And I think searchlights only arrived maybe in April that year. So yeah, cathedral still until the drone of the bombers, that ominous sort of noise. Two groups split. One group came in over Downpatrick, and the other group came across from Carrick. And because there was a lack of protection in the city, they could drop to 7,000 feet. They could bomb the cows, come home, and in reality nobody was going to challenge them. So the first target after midnight, target A, the tanks on Laga Conswater, and they execute a perfect bomb run. And about 15 years ago, maybe more, we conducted an interview like we're doing today with a lovely man who was from the 1923 committee, Jim Gourley. And Jim recounted, he said, no, they dropped the bombs in a straight line right across the pitch. It was boom, boom, boom. Now he maintained that it was a corner flag, the centre circle in there, but subsequently we were able to get photographs of what the Luftwaffe had done, and I think it actually starts about the centre circle but runs right across there. But the fear that the guys must have experienced up in that, watching not only the Oval, but but the whole of Belfast. Like they practically destroyed the shipyard, you know, and these guys helped us in that bunker watching the whole. And my own mother was, she had been evacuated out to Lurgan, and she told the story of them being woken up and taken to a field outside Lurgan because you could actually see the red orange glow of the city, you know. And for her as a 6, 7, 8-year-old, to know that her mother and her older brother were stuck on Solway Street and all her friends from Mersey Street must have been horrific, you know.
And the Oval's our home, always has been our home. It must have just completely destroyed everything we had. Jim
Gurley said that he got up the next morning and the damage everywhere, because it was everywhere. Like actually there were houses destroyed in Parkgate out here, you know, 3 or 4 houses completely destroyed here. But you had Witham Street, amongst others, because you had Witham Street, Thorndike Street, Westbourne Street, Avondale Street, Pims Avenue. So right around here, you know, people were waking up, whole families have been wiped out, you know, and bodies in the street, bodies being taken to the mortuaries at St George's and whatever. But Jim got up and he said the first thing he thought was, I'll gravitate towards the Oval, because that's what people did. And somebody stopped him in the street and said, where are you going? And he said, I'm going down to the Oval. And he said, there's no point, the Oval's not there anymore, it's completely gone. Because the pavilion, which was built between 1931 and 33, was completely wooden. It was completely wooden. It's not like what we're in today, which is the concrete and steel and whatever, but it was a long single-story wooden structure. So the blast from the bombs completely, and then the fires broke out, and you can see in photographs of Mersey Street School just the effect of the blast, with the windows and everything, the roofs came down and whatever. So he was told the Oval had gone, and it had, it all but in this sort of bowl shape that you have here. There was nothing, and Glentoran subsequently lost their playing kit, lost all their photographs, lost all their records, the trophies that were here, completely gone, and that must have been the most daunting thing for anybody who was running the club then, is to, where do we go from here, you know?
And was there anything saved at all? Any artifacts?
Remarkably, and this is the most incredible. It's like when you talk about the Ravens leaving the Tower of London. When I was researching the story of the Vienna Cup, I discovered that the chairman had made a speech in 1933, 1934, and he had said he was so proud of the achievements of Glentoran Football Club that he kept the Vienna Cup on a sideboard in his house. So the only thing which actually survives the bombing of the Oval is the Vienna Cup, because it's at his home. And after his passing, and if you know Shaw's Sweets, the Shaw family that make the sweets, he was one of the Shaws. After his passing, the trophy was handed back to the club in the 1950s, and remarkably, I think it spent a bit of time in the Albert Bar behind the counter in the Albert too. But this is a sign of, you know, you'll always survive. The Vienna Cup is a symbol of rebuilding and re-emergence.
And that amount of devastation, was the club on its last legs to nearly go out of existence after?
The club was gone. The club had nothing. There wasn't one vestige that they could hold on to, other, and this is where I believe Glentoran people come into their own. The only thing that the directors of Glentoran had to hold on to was the resilience of the supporters, that they wouldn't let it go. And there's a lovely instance. They have a board meeting after the bombing, and the bombing's not even the first thing on the agenda. They don't even bump it up. They just keep it as something else that has happened, and they deal with other matters. And then it's a case of, right, let's get on to the devastation of the ground. But it gets to a point where it's such a huge mountain to climb for Glentoran that they convene a meeting at the YMCA building on the Albert Bridge Road. It's where they convene their board meeting, and they convene it in July. Now we've only the names of 5 directors, but I firmly believe that there would have been more than that at the meeting. But this is where they were to take the decision as to whether Glentoran would pack in, just, or they would try and rebuild. And it was so important that the Belfast, East Belfast, and football in general, the journalists were gathered outside, waiting in ante rooms, almost like the verdict coming through on a, from a jury sort of thing. And the meeting went on and on into the wee small hours. And at one point, one of the directors came out, and the journalist asked him, "Is it over yet?" And he said these incredible words, and it's still, he says, at Glentoran it'll never be over. They're still arguing in there, sort of thing. But eventually the vote as to whether or not the pack in was split. So the decision was left to the then chairman, which is a gentleman by the name of Toby Mercer. And Toby Mercer, I think, knowing that by making the decision he could call on the people of East Belfast and he could call on the support, made the choice to go on. And that set off this 9-year journey from devastation here, black, grey, foul smelling, dank water that filled this place, and nothing that you can, to in 1949 up to 1953, building one of the best stadiums as it was in Great Britain, and that to me says everything you need to know about the people who were supporting them.
And coming back here,
1949, we played in August 1949, but it's an incredible journey. It's one of the things that I tried to do when I was sort of doing my own research was to find people who remembered what it was like here. And I interviewed this lovely man called George Mooney, who lived in Pimlico in London, but he was a pupil of Mersey Street back after the bombs had fallen. And they kind of rebuilt the school and got the kids back, 1940, 43, 44 and whatever. And he says, there's two things that I remember about the Blitz. He says, the first thing is that my mother had been to O'Hara's bakery and had bought soda farls, big thing of soda farls. And my dad had come in from work. And he said, she confronted him in front of us as to where the clothes rations were for the family, because everybody was sort of getting, food was rationed, clothes were rationed. And he had to admit that instead of giving the clothes rations to the family, he'd actually given them the Glentoran Football Club to allow them to buy their kit. And he said, I remember her lifting the soda bread and throwing it. So she throws him out of the house, and he says there was flour everywhere. He says, but that was the extent as to what people were prepared to do. But he said the other thing I remember was that there were holes in the walls here that, everything was just wide open pretty much. He said, but after when the school bell rang and school had finished, he says, we used to come out and there was one man that would be standing building the wall that you see when you come in, the facade where the turnstiles are now, those bricks. And he said there would be one guy who would stand every day on his own, and he was a bricklayer. But as it turns out, his name was Paddy Waters, and he was a player from Dublin. He was actually a Glentoran player who had come up to play for the Glens. And we were playing at Grosvenor Park at the time as well. But he said we come out and we laboured to him. We carried the wheelbarrows and mixed his mortar for him, and he. So when you're walking in through that door, that's hand built by one man. And then obviously the bigger breeze blocks and the walls that you see now, they were built by the men, the supporters, who would come at night, and they're professional builders as well. But everybody chipped in to build this place back, which is phenomenal. Look at it now; it's amazing.
And you're a man that studied a lot of history of Glentoran right from the very earliest of days up until the present day. The rebuilding of the stadium after the Blitz, how does that rank among the club's greatest achievements?
It's huge. It's right up there. I don't think anything in reality could contend with it, because it was such a challenge. It was unimaginable what had to be done, and even when materials arrived here to rebuild this, so the materials came in and people's houses had been devastated, and people, and you couldn't fault them at all. If there was bricks and mortar and things, people were actually taking them to build their own houses, So this is why the security had to be, the first thing to do was to build a wall around it. And we found these incredible letters about 10 years ago from men who had come back from the war, who wanted to be they applied for the job of security man and watchman. And there were hundreds of men who were looking for a job that wanted to become the watchman here to keep an eye on things. So it had to be sealed off. Bizarrely, the Oval, and nobody's ever been able to sort of say why it was, is 6 feet below the floodplain. Why it was built like that, maybe somebody thought it was a great idea to build this sort of, amphitheatre type thing. But it was a bane of our lives even before but once the bombing hit that corner over just at the city end, it just flooded perennially. So this pitch, which would go on to be revered as one of in my mind, is sort of reconstituted. And they brought a flock of sheep in from the country, and during the summer the sheep would graze here, and people from the east would walk around the periphery. It was a bit of a walk for them, and they could come in. Glentoran had a horse. We had a horse that dragged the roller. We kept the horse here, So a colossal job to get it back. They employed an architect called Harry Lynn, and Harry took the board of directors to places like Goodison Park and showed them what could be built here. And the belief was they were going for it. This was meant to be one of the best sort of stadiums in the United Kingdom. And a lovely thing that when you bring visitors, or even if you take a walk onto the centre circle there, if you turn and look at the main stand, it stops. It actually stops, and the director's box is at the end of the stand. And that's exactly at the point where Glentoran ran out of money and couldn't build on. You can tell exactly the time that the money dried up. And so the first stands were built in 1949. There was no back to them then, so you could see right out on the railway. This stand finished, I think, in about 1953, and still to my mind, just a magical, mystical place with the best views. If you're up there watching a game, like even if the football's a wee bit sort of, touch and go, you have this incredible view to look at.